This is my story edit performance, and it is Wayside School Gets a Little Stranger, and it's intended for a family story time. The sign had hung on the door for 242 days. Students would walk up to the old school building and they would read the sign and they would hang their heads sadly and walk away. And Lewis saw them all day in and day out, and he saw their sad little faces, but he never said hi to them. He never tried to talk to them. In fact, most of the time he would hide if he saw them coming. Lewis used to be the yard teacher at Wayside School. He would pass out the balls and he would play with the kids at recess and at lunch, but the school fell into disrepair, and so all the kids were sent to new schools. Horrible, horrible schools. In fact, no two kids were all sent to the same school. So Lewis decided that the best thing to do would be to repair the school so all the kids could come back. So he stayed in the school and he painted and he nailed and he shoveled and he mopped and he did everything he could to get the school back to working order. He even slept there. He never went home. There was a couch in the teacher's lounge on the 12th floor, and that's where he stayed every single night. Sometimes it seemed hopeless. The job was just too big. There was too much to do, and he couldn't do it all himself. But then he would think of those sad little faces of those poor little kids in those horrible schools, and he decided that he had to do whatever he could to fix up the school for them. So, after 242 days, the school was polished and painted, and it looked beautiful, and it was ready to open again. Now, before we go into Wayside School, there's something you should know about it. Wayside School was accidentally built sideways. So originally, it was supposed to be one story of 30 classrooms, but the builder accidentally built it 30 stories with one classroom each, except there's no 19th story. So the kids like it because they have this extra large playground that they get to play in. Miss Jules teaches class all the way on the top on the 30th floor. Miss Zarves teaches class on the 19th floor, but there is no 19th floor, so there is no Mrs. Zarves. You got it? Okay, good. Can you explain it to me? So all of the kids started returning to the playground, and they all found their friends, and they were all greeting each other once again. Lewis! He heard, and he turned, and he saw this big mound of red and blue barreling towards him. Sherry, he said, right before she jumped on top of him, and she wrapped her arms around his neck, and she gave him a big hug. Oh, I'm so glad to be back, she said. Now I can finally get some sleep. And all around Lewis, there were cries from all the students as they greeted their friends. Calvin! Bebe shouted. Bebe! Calvin shouted, and they ran at each other from opposite sides of the playground and smashed into each other right in the middle. Hey, buddy, said Jason to Joe. Hey, friend, said Joe to Jason. And everywhere he looked, friends were meeting friends and kids were coming back together. Even Kathy, the meanest kid in Miss Jules' class, was greeting everybody. Hey, big ears, she said to Myron. Long time no see. Hey, Smelly, she said to Damien. I bet you didn't take a shower in those entire 242 days now, did you? Hey, Todd, said Sherry. Todd had run onto the playground from way over on the corner. But he didn't stop and talk to Sherry. He just kept running. Hey, Todd, said Allison, but he didn't stop for Allison either. He just kept running, and he ran and he ran and he ran all the way up to the side of the building. And before anybody could say anything, he planted a big old kiss right on the side of Wayside School. Todd had been sent to the worst school of all. It was horrible. The first thing they made all the kids do every morning was, oh, wait a minute, I don't have to tell you. He was sent to your school. You already know. So Damien was super excited. He couldn't wait to get all the way up back to the top of the 30th floor where his classroom was and his favorite teacher, Mrs. Jules, was. So he ran all the way up the stairs, and by the time he got to the top, he was huffing and puffing. 30 stories was a lot, even without the 19th story, and he was out of shape. And by the time he got up there, his chest hurt and his side hurt, and there was a blister on his foot from where his shoe had rubbed on it. And he flew open the door, and he collapsed on the floor, and he said, Hey, Miss Jules. Hi, Damien. Welcome back, said Miss Jules. Something was different about Mrs. Jules, Damien noticed, but he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was, but there was something different about her. So slowly but surely, all the kids in the classroom on the 30th floor started coming up the stairs, and they started coming to the classroom, and every single one of them was huffing and puffing because 30 really is a lot of stories to have to run up. So the children, though, were very excited to be back in class, and shouts of joy could be heard from every corner of the room, and they were talking and laughing with their friends, and all of a sudden they all saw Miss Jules hold up 2 fingers. So everybody in the classroom went completely silent. Joy stopped shouting, finally, and Miss Jules told them all to take their seats. So they all sat down where they did before the school closed, and class started. Now, said Miss Jules, who can tell me what you learned at your other schools? Oh, said Mac, civilization. Wow, said Miss Jules. What about civilization? We learned it, said Mac. Well, that's great, said Mrs. Jules. Can you tell us something about civilization? Said Mac. He thought about it, and he thought about it. I don't remember, he said. Well, that's okay, said Mrs. Jules. Anybody else? Ooh, Rondi raised her hand. Yes, Rondi, Miss Jules called on her. Evaporation. Very good, Rondi. Can you tell us all something about evaporation? Nope, said Rondi. Well, okay, said Miss Jules. Anybody else? Allison raised her hand. Yes, Allison? We learned about exaggeration. It was all we ever talked about. We had like 1,000 tests on it, and our teacher would literally kill you if you spelled it wrong. Wow, said Miss Jules. Well, you certainly learned your lesson about exaggeration. I did, she said. And Mrs. Jules said, I guess we'll just have to pick up right where we left off. But just then, Mr. Kidswatter's voice came over the PA system. Good morning, boys and girls. Mr. Kidswatter was the principal, and he paused a moment because he thought every kid in the entire school was saying, Good morning, Mr. Kidswatter, back to him. But nobody said it. Welcome back to Wayside School. I know I'm sure glad to be back. It was wonderful to see all your bright and chipper faces this morning. I sure missed every single one of you. And welcome back to Miss Mush, too. Today's lunch menu will be baked liver in a purple sauce. She actually cooked it before the school was closed, but she said it's still just as tasty as ever. So let's all remember to have a great day. And remember, I'm your friend, and you're my friend, and if you ever need a friend, you can always come to me. Well, isn't that nice, said Miss Jules. What a bunch of baloney. There I was, just lying on the beach in Jamaica, when suddenly I get this fax that the dumb school was back open. Well, those kids better not bother me. My friends, that's a joke. Like I would really want to be friends with a bunch of those snot-nosed little... What? Don't tell me to shut up. You shut up. What do you mean it's on? What do you mean? So they're hearing what I'm saying this very second? Well, how do you turn it off? What button? I don't see your red button. There's no red button. Oh, here it... And so the days went on and on at Wayside School just like they had before. And one day, just before Christmas vacation, the students came in and found a big hunk of yarn and 2 knitting needles sitting on top of their desks. Today we're going to learn how to knit, said Miss Jules. And she showed the class how it was done. Well, you see, you put this needle through here, you wrap this around like this, you wrap this here, you put this here, you stick this through here, you pull this, and you stick this up here, and you wrap this around here. Any questions? Everybody just kind of stared at her. Great! Then I want you to make socks, she said. Get started. And so she sat down at her desk and the kids got to work. Damon looked at her again and he thought, there's something is different about Miss Jules. She was just sitting at her desk knitting and eating bolognios. He didn't remember her ever eating a bologno before. A bologno was something that was invented by Miss Mush. It was a regular Oreo, but instead of that white part in the middle, it had a big old slab of bologna stuck in there. Miss Jules got up and she cleared her throat and she started walking around the room. That's very nice, DJ, she said. You're doing a fine job, Ronnie, she said. And then she stopped at Joe's desk. Oh, Joe, she gushed. Look, everybody, look at Joe's sock. And she held it up. Isn't this the most beautiful sock you've ever seen? And everybody oohed and awed because it really was a beautiful sock. Joe could knit. That boy was born to knit. Oh, said Miss Jules, I just love this sock. And she started to sob. Uh-oh, said Kathy. I think she's finally lost it. I love you, Kathy, said Miss Jules. And she looked around. I love all of you. I love this chair, and I love this desk, and I love the blackboard. And she walked down to the floor where there was a ruler sitting on the floor, and she picked it up and she held it and she said, "I love this ruler." "Hey, that's mine," said Dana. "Oh, but you can have it, I guess, if you want." "Oh, I don't want your ruler, Dana," she said, and she gave it back to her. "Do you want my scissors?" asked Sherry. "Don't give her anything sharp," said Kathy. "Oh, I just love you all so much," said Mrs. Jules. I'm gonna miss you so much." "Are you going away?" asked Damien. "Yes, I'm going away." "Are you sick?" asked Allison. "No, I'm not sick," she said. "In fact, I'm better than I've ever been in my whole life. You see, I'm gonna have a baby." "A baby!" And everybody was so excited. Damien jumped out of his chair and he rushed up and he gave her a big hug, and soon all of the students had run up and they were hugging her and they were all so excited. "Yes," Miss Jewell said, "today is my last day here. My doctor doesn't want me walking up and down 30 flights of stairs every day if I'm going to have a baby." "I'm going to miss you so much," said Damien. "We just got back and now you're leaving already." He was terribly sad, as were the rest of the kids. "Now don't be sad," said Miss Jules. "You guys are going to have a great time while I've gone. In fact, there's a wonderful teacher who's going to come and teach you. In fact, I spoke to him just this morning. He sounds great." "Our new teacher's a man?" said Damien. He was very excited. None of them had ever had a man teacher before. "Yes," said Mrs. Jules. "His name is Mr. Gorf."